Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah, today we're going to do our part 2 for Together for Palestine. And today's focus is going to be more on how we're going to channel our emotions in a positive way. How do we advocate responsibly? And how do we navigate difficult or uncertain spaces, inshallah. To start off, we're going to do a Quran recitation, inshallah, with the translation. It should show up soon. And then after that, we're going to have a perspective talk. And then after that, we're going to start the presentation, inshallah. And then after that, we're going to have Q&A. It's up? So, Ayah 98. Okay. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل يا أهل الكتاب لم تكفرون بآيات الله والله شهيد على ما تعملون. قل يا أهل الكتاب لم تصدون عن سبيل الله من آمن تبغونها عوجا لم تصدون عن سبيل الله من آمن تبغونها عوجا وأنتم شهداء وما الله بغافل عما تعملون. يا أيها الذين آمنوا إن تطيعوا فريقا من الذين أوتوا الكتاب يردوكم بعد إيمانكم كافرين. وكيف تكفرون وأنتم تتلى عليكم آيات الله وفيكم رسوله ومن يعتصم بالله فقد هدي إلى صراط مستقيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. واعتصموا بحبل الله جميعا ولا تفرقوا واذكروا نعمة الله عليكم إذ كنتم أعداء فألف بين قلوبكم فأصبحتم بنعمته إخوانا وكنتم على شفا حفرة من النار فأنقذكم منها فألف بين قلوبكم فأصبحتم بنعمته
إخوانا وكنتم على شفا حفرة من النار فأنقذكم منها كذلك يبين الله لكم آياته لعلكم تهتدون ولتكن منكم أمة يدعون إلى الخير ويأمرون بالمعروف وينهون عن المنكر وأولئك هم المفلحون ولا تكونوا كالذين تفرقوا واختلفوا من بعد ما جاءهم البينات وأولئك لهم عذاب عظيم يوم تبيض وجوه وتسود وجوه فأما الذين اسودت وجوههم أكفرتم بعد إيمانكم فذوقوا العذاب بما كنتم تكفرون وأما الذين ابيضت وجوههم ففي رحمة الله هم فيها خالدون تلك آيات الله نتلوها عليك بالحق وما الله يريد ظلما للعالمين ولله ما في السماوات وما في الأرض وإلى الله ترجع الأمور كنتم خير أمة أخرجت للناس تأمرون بالمعروف وتنهون عن المنكر وتؤمنون بالله ولو آمن أهل الكتاب لكان خيرا لهم منهم المؤمنون وأكثرهم الفاسقون لن يضروكم إلا أذى وإن يقاتلوكم يولوكم الأدبار ثم لا ينصرون ضربت عليهم الذلة أينما ثقفوا إلا بحبل من الله وحبل من الناس وباءوا بغضب من الله وضربت عليهم المسكنة ذلك بأنهم كانوا يكفرون بآيات الله ويقتلون الأنبياء بغير حق ذلك بما عصوا وكانوا يعتدون ليسوا سواء من أهل الكتاب أمة قائمة يتلون آيات الله من أهل الكتاب أمة قائمة يتلون آيات الله آناء الليل وهم يسجدون يؤمنون بالله واليوم الآخر ويأمرون بالمعروف وينهون عن المنكر ويسارعون في الخيرات وأولئك من الصالحين وما يفعلوا من خير فلن واكفروا والله عليم بالمتقين.
Inshallah, we're going to transition now, inshallah, to a little perspective activity. Not activity, it's a talk. Is this, can you see on this, on the live? Yeah, I'm trying. All right, there we go. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. As-salatu was-salamu ala Rasulina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. I'm going to try to keep this relatively short, inshallah, so we can transition over to Sarah. Last time we did this activity of perspective to see where we're at compared to everything else that Allah Azza wa Jalla has created. And we mentioned that this earth, something tiny over there, relative to the other planets, but also relative to the sun. And then we zoomed out more, step by step, until finally we said that in the grand scheme of things, in just the observable universe, which we said that might be the lowest of the heavens, of the 7 heavens, our cluster, our supercluster, which contains multiple clusters, which contains our galaxy, which contains our solar system, which then contains our Earth, and so on. If this is insignificant compared to the other samawat, and Allah Azza wa Jalla created that, then when it comes to making dua, imagine the power of that dua that you're going to make with this perspective. But more than that, Allah Azza wa Jalla, when He talks about rushing for the maghfirah of Allah Azza wa Jalla, the forgiveness of Allah Azza wa Jalla, He mentions سارعوا إلى مغفرة من ربكم وجنة عرضها السماوات والأرض. Hasten or rush to the maghfirah of Allah Azza wa Jalla, and a Jannah, the width of which is like the heavens and the earth. So let that sink in for a moment. The width of Jannah is like the heavens and the earth put together. So if this is just the first heaven, and there's 6 more beyond that, imagine the vastness of Jannah. And when Adam alayhi salam was sent to earth, in fact, before Allah Azza wa Jalla created Adam alayhi salam, He told the angels that He's going to send somebody to the earth. And so they just asked this question, I think it's very relevant today. Today, but it's also something that many people around the world have to come to terms with on a daily basis. And they asked Allah Azza wa Jalla if He's going to send on earth somebody who's going to spill blood, cause corruption, and so on. And they said, وَنَحْنُ نُسَبِّحُ بِحَمْدِكَ, and we're always glorifying your praises. They're doing everything that Allah Azza wa Jalla wants them to do. But are you going to send somebody who's going to spill blood, shed blood, cause corruption on the earth, do bad things? And Allah Azza wa Jalla said, إِنِّي أَعْلَمُ مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ, that I know what you don't know. And when Adam alayhi salam is sent to earth, Allah Azza wa Jalla tells him, فَإِمَّا يَأْتِيَنَّكُم مِّنِّي هُدًى فَمَنْ تَبِعَ هُدَايَ فَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. That whenever guidance comes to you from me, then whoever it is that follows it, فَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ, there's going to be no fear on them and no grief. And in another place in Surah Taha, Allah Azza wa Jalla also refers to this. And Allah Azza wa Jalla mentions about how this guidance is also going to help the person not feel misguided and not feel straightened, like having their circumstances tighten up. فَلَا يَضْلُ وَلَا يَشْقَى. This person is not going to have misguidance. This person is going to always remain guided And they're not going to feel that the world is coming close around them, like as in becoming tight. On the other hand, Allah Azza wa Jalla says, وَمَنْ أَعْرَضَ عَنْ ذِكْرِي فَإِنَّ لَهُ مَعِيشَةً ضَنْكَ. And whoever turns away from my reminder, then for them is going to be a very, very difficult life. So putting things in perspective, Allah Azza wa Jalla, when He sent Adam alayhi salam, He did not leave him without guidance. He knew exactly what was going to happen all the way until the Day of Judgment. In fact, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam tells us, كتب الله مقادير الخلائق قبل أن يخلق السماوات والأرض ب50,000 سنة. That Allah Azza wa Jalla had pretty much preordained everything that's going to happen, measured everything that's going to happen, everything in the earth, everything in the creation. Everything was apportioned 50,000 years before He created the heavens and the earth. قبل أن يخلق السماوات والأرض ب50,000 سنة. 50,000 years before He created the heavens and the earth, Allah Azza wa Jalla had already ordained what's going to happen. So nothing is happening that was unknown to Allah Azza wa Jalla. Nothing is happening that is unknown to Allah Azza wa Jalla. And instead, Allah Azza wa Jalla gave us guidance on how to navigate the circumstances that we're going to be living in. From the time of Adam alayhi salam all the way until the last person that exists here. And amongst the guidance that we see is some of what I recited. And Allah Azza wa Jalla mentions about us as being the best ummah that has been sent forth to mankind. And what are the qualities of this ummah? تأمرون بالمعروف وتنهون عن المنكر. That you enjoin or command the good and you forbid the evil. وتنهون عن المنكر is you actively taking a stance against anything that you see as bad. And this is similar to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, for example, among many other places, mentioning about that if you see a munkar, whoever sees a munkar from among you, then let him change it with his hand, and if not with his hand, then his tongue, and if not, at least feel bad about it. And he mentioned this as ad'aful iman. This is the weakest of iman. But just the fact that you have a conscience, that in itself is a big blessing from Allah Azza wa Jalla. This right here, understanding that something is wrong when you see it, this is something that Allah Azza wa Jalla gives to us, and it is part of iman. But the higher level of iman is being proactive against things that are not good, and actively doing the things that are good. In Surah Al-Anbiya, Allah Azza wa Jalla mentions about some of the Prophets alayhim salam, and He's talking about like the good stuff about them, right? And He describes them, and He says, كانوا يسارعون في الخيرات. They were always rushing to do good things. Consider Musa alayhi salam, for example, when he gets to Madian, and he's exhausted, he has nothing. No resources, no wealth, even the clothes are tattered. No food, no place to be. And then he sees these two ladies waiting until all the men clear out. So they're not getting their turn, yani. And so he steps in and tries to rectify this wrong that he sees happening. So even in the most destitute of situations, he doesn't give up, continuously doing the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted him to do. And look at this situation of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam throughout his life. When he's going through a difficult test, Allah Azza wa Jalla gives him information about the people before them. The Prophets alayhim salam, ulul azm min ar-rusul, the ones that had gone through the most difficult of tests and trials. He's given their examples to give him some sort of comfort, some sort of motivation. He's not alone in this. Generations have gone by. Prophets alayhim salam have gone by, who've gone through such difficult tests. But the glad tidings that we get from this is that Allah Azza wa Jalla has given us guidance in this Quran and in the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam on how to navigate all of the things that we see again and again happening. There is something else to have hope in, and that is that the cycles of tyranny always come and go, but they have the same patterns. Fir'aun, for example, did the exact same things that we see tyrants of today doing, and the Quraysh doing. It's the same cycle, same thing again and again and again and again. And Allah Azza wa Jalla mentions about the plot of shaitan, كان ضعيفا, He says. إن كيد الشيطان كان ضعيفا. That the plot of shaitan is weak. Think about it. if you study history, if you stay educated, you'll see the patterns again and again, and you'll know how the downfall comes and when it comes. When a person becomes belligerent, reckless, careless, that tyrant is expressing their insecurity and fear. And they're just doing whatever it takes to just grasp at something that they know is slipping away. And that is when you know that the end is coming. Consider Fir'aun, for example. In the time of Musa alayhi salam in Surah Al-Ghafir, Allah Azza wa Jalla describes some of these things, and you'll see other places too, like Surah Al-Qasas and Surah Al-Shu'ara and so on. You'll see the descriptions of how Fir'aun tried everything he could to make Musa alayhi salam and his followers look like evil. In fact, in Surah Al-Ghafir, he talks about how I'm the one who's giving you good news. I'm the one who's guiding you. I'm the one who's guiding you to the right path. And these people over here, this person is just going to cause you corruption and so on. Referring to Musa alayhi salam and his followers. And then he wants to make a spectacle. So he brings everyone together and he wants to prove that he is like, the best one. So he brings his magicians to come out. But the very interesting thing that happens over here, as he's doing this, as he's like desperate for something, he's talking about things like, am I not the Lord of everything over here? These gardens, these rivers and stuff, don't I control them? He has to keep reminding people because he knows that if he doesn't do that, chances are they're going to see the reality. In other words, to be obeyed, he has to beg the people to obey him. If you look at Greek and Roman mythology, the same concept appears. For example, when the gods, in this mythology, when they consider themselves not being, or when they see themselves not being worshipped, they find themselves weakened. And so they have to find ways to get people to worship them. Can you see the irony over here? That somebody who is projecting power and this invincibility, that person is actually going out to the people, depending on the people to have that appearance. So when you see these cycles, and you have studied the patterns of the cycles before, you start realizing when the downfall is coming. When desperation takes over a person, this tyrant, when they become reckless, then you see the tides are turning. And although that is not guaranteed that we're at the end yet, it gives hope to the people who are still fighting the cause. It might not happen in our generation. It might, but if it doesn't matter. Because what Allah Azza wa Jalla is asking of you is to keep trying. Because you're going to be graded for whatever you did, the best of what you did. بِأَحْسَنِ مَا كَانُوا يَعْمَلُونَ. Allah Azza wa Jalla rewards the people based on the best of what they did. I'll give you a story. The three winners, Diya was one of them, rahimahullah. One time, he was praying over here next to the minbar over there. This is like many, many years ago, subhanAllah. And it was Friday night. And in the gym, everyone's playing basketball, everyone's ready, So this is Maghrib, we prayed Maghrib, and then everyone goes, all the youth go, and they start playing basketball. You can hear the balls dribbling and so on. But for him, he had a different thing in mind. He was here to play basketball, of course, as well. But when it came time to finish praying, and then after finishing prayer, it came time to pray Sunnah, he stood up over there, and I was sitting over here somewhere. So I'm just watching him, He doesn't know I'm watching him. So he stands up, he prays, and he perfects every part of it. He stands, he makes ruku, takes his time, stands up, goes to sujood, makes perfect sujood, just stays there. There's no rush in him. I'm just observing and watching. And then after he's done, we say salam, and I appreciate it. And I tell him that I was watching you, and everyone else was in the gym, and they were dribbling their basketballs and so on. But for you, it was a different thing. You were focused on your priorities. Sometime afterwards, I was given a khutbah at one of the other masajid, and after I finished, I went outside, and he had his table outside, and he was doing fundraising. And so, in his table, he has a few packages, just the kind of stuff that he was going to take overseas. And he's talking about the cause that he has. Some of you guys might have seen the videos, or the video where he was in dental school at UNC, and he was just fundraising and so on. Well, the reality is, he didn't end up seeing the results of his effort. what really happened at the end of the day happened after his shahada, inshallah. He did whatever he could. He had his priorities straight. He didn't give up. Just because he didn't have all the money in the world, just because he didn't have all the resources in the world, that didn't mean that was the end for him. For him, it was just a matter of doing his part. And after he passed away, rahmatullah alayh, is when everything expanded to the point that he could not have imagined. He could not have imagined that before. So much happened afterwards. Things that he could never have imagined happened just because of that deep sincerity he must have had, inshallah. So our effort is what Allah Azza wa Jalla is looking at. كَانُوا يُسَارِعُونَ فِي الْخَيْرَاتِ means that these people are always rushing to do good things. And that's what this is all about. Islam ultimately is a system to help us do what's good and to help people avoid the things that are bad or harmful. And to conclude, I want to give you a perspective on this, inshallah. The scholars, since the time of the Prophet ﷺ, continued exploring what are the objectives of Islam, what are the objectives of Sharia. And some of you guys might remember not too long ago, there was this whole thing of Sharia creep. Many politicians were afraid of Sharia coming to America and so on and like taking over it and all that, right? But imagine if we gave da'wah in a way where they understood the objectives of Sharia, as opposed to random tidbits that we might sometimes give in da'wah. These scholars over time, over centuries, they considered again and again, what is the impact of following Islam in a community, in a society, in a country? And the conclusion that they made, and this goes back all the way to Imam al-Ghazali, rahmatullah alayh, Imam al-Haramayn al-Juwayni, Ibn al-Qayyim, rahmatullah alayh, all of these people, they commented on this, and this is like centuries ago. Like 600, 700 years ago. And they concluded among the objectives of Sharia, and there's different number that they gave, but I'll give you the ones that are more commonly used today. One of them is hifdhuddin, the protection of this religion. Because this religion is the one that protects everything else that comes after it, right? And so learning the deen and so on is within this. Another thing is hifdhun nafs, the protection of life. So many of our rulings are focused on protecting people's lives, protecting the life of innocent. In fact, what Allah Azza wa Jalla sent to Musa alayhi salam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in Surah Al-Ma'idah about this. Right after he talks about the story of the two sons of Adam alayhi salam, one killed the other. Allah Azza wa Jalla in the next verse talks about how because of this, Allah Azza wa Jalla enjoined upon the children of Israel alayhi salam. This is Yaqub alayhi salam. That whoever kills one innocent soul, and I'm going to summarize it, whoever kills an innocent soul, just for the sake of it, or to spread mischief in the land and so on, then it's as if this person has killed the entirety of mankind. And whoever saves that soul, that innocent soul, it's as if this person has saved the entirety of mankind. This is one of those things that the Mufassirun mentioned, one of those commandments or one of the commands that Allah Azza wa Jalla had given to Banu Israel that we also inherited from them, in the sense that we have the same rule. So protection of life is one of the highest objectives of the Sharia. Another one is the protection of wealth and property. Another one is the protection of honor. This is why we don't insult people, we don't mock people, we don't abuse people, and so on. The protection of lineage, where marriages are supposed to be instituted and so on in the proper ways and so on. At the end of the day, there's also hifdh al-aql, making sure the person's understanding of things is proper, making sure also their mental faculties are proper and so on, supporting in that. If this is what Islam is all about, can you imagine the impact that this would have on the people if they understood that what is Islam? Not only the people who are non-Muslims, but also Muslims. Imagine the motivation and empowerment you would feel if you understood that this is your religion. That the aims of this religion are the things that universally are among the most accepted or the most valued of moral values. So as you go forward, and inshallah, Sarah is going to cover some of these things, remember that this religion is about activism. It's not about going into a corner and staying away from everything. Rather, it's to achieve these objectives that Allah Azza wa Jalla wants us to achieve. Because if these things were present in this earth, a lot of what we see over here of pain and suffering and grief could be avoided. And remember that whatever you do for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jalla, it is never lost. It is never forgotten by Allah Azza wa Jalla. And when Allah Azza wa Jalla rewards you for taking care of His slaves, and that is the entirety of mankind, then consider what He would give you. If Allah Azza wa Jalla, and let me give you an example of a mother. Imagine if you took care of somebody's child. There's a mother, and you take care of her child, and you just do everything that you can to make sure that the child has everything the child needs. Imagine how the mother is going to feel towards you. You went out of your way to take care of her child. If you take care of Allah Azza wa Jalla, Allah Azza wa Jalla's slaves, and He is more merciful to His slaves than a mother is to her child, imagine what He will give you in return. If Allah Azza wa Jalla is more merciful than a mother to her child, imagine what He will give you in return for showing any kind of good to His slaves. And Allah Azza wa Jalla never forgets. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك جزاكم الله خيرا.
Assalamu alaikum. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Salatu wassalam ala Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Today we're going to be discussing responsible advocacy and navigating difficult situations and spaces. I'm going to preemptively ask for forgiveness and a little bit of grace. My children are with me. They are young. This is Ibrahim. He will occasionally interrupt and ask questions about whatever it is that he's doing. I want to start this off with a couple of questions, and we're going to go through this together. Jazakallah khair, Mahin, for opening us up with perspective, and I'm going to learn how to use my computer, I promise. There we go. Yes. Yeah, that's right. All right. So if you could go here, and I want to know what everybody's feeling right now. We keep coming back around to this and talking about the expressions that it feels like we're choking, we're overwhelmed, we're distressed. I just want to see where everybody's at. from there, inshallah. All right. We're going to go see this. Nope. Where is it? I can find my mouse. So here's what we're looking at. Hopeful, burnt out, sadness, despair, somewhat exhausted, helpless, scared, heartbroken, desensitized. All of these things, where hopeful keeps getting bigger, which means a lot of people are starting to become a little bit more hopeful. We're going to discuss that a little bit more. I think that's worth looking into. Somewhat exhausted. I'm with you. All right. So bismillah. So here's the thing. I'm going to be very honest with you guys. It was very hard to prepare for this. I can't tear myself away from the news. I'm constantly checking Instagram because apparently that's just become the way to get information and to get a live feed other than Al Jazeera and other news sources. I'm a mom of 3 kids and trying to navigate that space and be present for my children, and also what I see on the news is very hard. And then sometimes when you go into spaces, you don't know what you're going to get. You don't know what you're going to experience. You don't know what people are going to say or respond when you present something. So, a little background on me. My name is Sarah Haddad. I'm born and raised in Raleigh, North Carolina, to a Palestinian family. I can tell you, I remember when we used to pray in the Red Building. I grew up in this masjid. I remember when Jummah used to be for the women, the overflow was in the gym. And I can tell you all the things that went on here. And, but you know, this is where my family settled. This is where my dad came. This is where my mom came. My grandfathers are both Palestinian, both my maternal and paternal side. My paternal grandfather, Saeed, he's from Jaffa, which is where Tel Aviv is now. And my maternal grandfather is from Beit Zira, which is in the West Bank and on the border of the 1948 line. Both of them fled in 1948. One went to Lebanon, the other one went to Jordan. They were in their late teens to early 20s. And since then, you could argue that I was the first generation since 1948 to be a natural-born citizen of the world. So when I was born, I had a citizenship. I had a place, and that is the United States. And my family had to deal with the issues of immigration, among other things. I went to NC State. My major was biochemistry because I was going to go to med school, and then about a year later, I decided, no, that's not for me. And my minor's in Middle Eastern Studies. So I'm finally really getting able to utilize this minor. I've done it for a long time, and it's been refined over the years. So this history is really important to me, not just because of my heritage, but because of what I studied and what I explored in this context. So what we're going to go through today is, we have some objectives, and we're going to discuss what does it look like to have responsible advocacy in this space. If you can't hear me, let me know so that I can raise my voice or figure out how to use this, inshallah. So, our objectives today are discussing the concept of responsible advocacy and the application through the lens of Islam and what it looks like, and navigating conversations in spaces that aren't traditionally open to disagreements or independent thought. The issue with advocacy and what I'm seeing in this space that we're discussing, I'm going to ask one thing of everybody. Do not expect your advocacy to look like somebody else's advocacy. And to stay away from the criticism of what you perceive to be somebody's advocacy is not being enough, and shift it as just do what you can do, because each one of us has a role. And yours is not going to look like others, and the success of a society and a platform is everybody fulfilling their roles. I'm doing what I know how to do. I'm starting to have to get out of my comfort zone and do things that I don't know how to do. That's the point of growth. But start with what you know and go from there. So that's the first and foremost of this conversation that I want to focus on. So we move into the idea of hope. And I want to articulate that the hope comes from the Quran. And all of this that we're we're dealing with and that we're experiencing and we're absorbing and we're witnessing, nothing comes without the guidance of the Quran. It's all in there, in the seerah and how the life of the Prophet ﷺ and all the prophets before him, alayhim salam. We know that the answers are there. And to keep your orientation towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in the Quran we hear, and they plotted, and Allah is the best of plotters. Allah knows everything. Allah knew what Shaitan was doing, Iblis was doing in Jannah, what he was coming up with to try to use Adam and Eve to get kicked out. Allah was not unaware. And that was, and Shaitan was so arrogant to think that he could manipulate the situation. Allah knew, and Allah allowed it to happen. Do not suppose that Allah is heedless of the deeds of the wrongdoers. He merely grants them reprieve till a day where eyes will stare transfixed. Again, Allah knows. None of this is without His will. Allah is giving them what they want. They want the power, they want whatever it is. But they'll have to deal with Allah. And so our job is to speak the truth. And the best thing I heard last week, I was in Baltimore, up in Maryland, and I was listening to another speech about Palestine. The Imam said the truth can stand on its own 2 feet. You don't need to sell it. You don't need to try to posture it. Just stick with the truth. And that's going to keep, that's a big part of all of this in advocacy. Speak the truth. Don't try to manipulate the situation. Don't feel like you have to sell it. Just speak the truth. And they devise their plot, but their plot lies with God. Though their plot lies with God, through their plotting be such as to move mountains. They think that they have this, it can move, they think that they can do everything. It's arrogance. Fir'aun, when the message came to Fir'aun, and we know this in Surah Al-Nazi'at, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends Musa to speak to Fir'aun and give the message, and Fir'aun said, I'm your Lord. You'll worship me. Allah knew what he was going to do. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent Musa to do something that was hard for him. Remember, Musa asked Allah, send with me my brother. I don't think I'm good enough to talk because I get frustrated. And when I get frustrated, I get angry. Allah said, no, you can do it. I'll send with you your brother, but you can do it because this is going to be hard. It's a test for all of us. So don't think you're the first to be tested. And for me, that's what helps me get into the perspective of, I can do this. I'm not the first and I will not be the last. So let's start off with some definitions. What is advocacy and what is an advocate? Advocacy is public support for or recommendation of a particular cause or policy. An advocate is a person who publicly supports or recommends a particular cause or policy. So notice the key factor in here is public support. That's an advocate. And that's advocacy. It's public support. So you can dislike something or support something internally, but the purpose of advocacy is being public with your support. What's amazing is I got a text message this morning from a good friend. She's not Muslim. She's not Palestinian or Arab or anything. And a friend of her friend made a jack-o'-lantern that said, Free Palestine. Was I expecting that this morning? No. But the message is getting out there. People that you didn't think that would be touting this, it's picking up in little places. Don't let main media diminish, or the media that we see diminish your advocacy. It's there. It's happening. It's in little spaces. Keep standing on the truth. Now, the key to it, though, is responsible advocacy. The concept of being a responsible advocate is to have a higher level of autonomy by nature so that you yourself can self-regulate and that you can oversee, regulate, and motivate yourself and adjust as you see fit. So you're not going into an argument I don't even say argument, a conversation to advocate something and getting riled up by it, because guess what? That is the goal of somebody that is there to fight your perspective. I can't tell you how many times I've gone into spaces or witnessed it, whether it be in public school board hearings, where I've had a friend, she was speaking to the school board and presenting her point of view for equality across the board for children of minorities in the Wake County Public School System. During her conversation and her advocacy, somebody in the crowd yelled out "F you" very loudly with some other words. Do you engage in that, or do you dismiss it? There's different ways of handling it, and she engaged with it in a way that ended it. And then, but it was on live public television. And we have to recognize that there are going to be people that are going to try to interrogate you, that are going to try to get a rise out of you. Sometimes you just got to nip it in the bud, but sometimes you just dismiss it and keep moving on. You have to decide in the space that you're in and in the time that you're in, what is the most appropriate, and you got to think on your feet. And that takes practice. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. You just got to reassess and not continue to, don't hold yourself so accountable that you don't allow yourself room to grow or room to make a mistake. Sometimes it's going to go great, sometimes it's not going to be great. And the responsibility is on you, though, to self-reflect and to go back and see, well, how could I do that better? Responsible actors do not need to depend on external mediated motivational pressure for responsive adjustment. If you notice that definition, you have the capacity to impose moral law on yourself, having moral autonomy. And I think personally, and I've gone back to this several times, I think that's what makes Muslims unique, because we have a sense of moral autonomy. Meaning, I think the best conversation I ever had was with a coworker asking me, I said, oh, it's close to the end of Ramadan. I need to pay my zakat. I didn't pay it yet. He's like, what's that? I said, well, we have taxes specific times of the year. He said, so who do you pay it to? I was like, well, I just give it to the mosque because I don't know where to distribute it. And he's like, so they keep track? I was like, no. He's like, who keeps track? I was like, we do. He's like, what do you mean? I said, it's my job to pay my zakat. It's not anybody's job to keep up with it. And that was not something he expected. And in a further conversation with a Muslim friend, it was because we have that moral autonomy and the responsibility for ourselves and know that everything goes back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we are able to self-regulate. A lot of us will carry a lot of guilt and shame because we feel like we're not doing enough because we hold ourselves to a higher standard. I don't want that to be the thing that holds you back, because Allah is the most merciful. Allah is the most understanding of the things that we can and can't do. We have to keep pushing ourselves when we can. But don't be so hard on yourself in the same space. Just understand that there's a positive here that we can regulate ourselves and our morality in the space that we're in. So when you're an advocate, the point of this being is understand as a Muslim, you already imposed that moral law on yourself. So don't go out cussing people out. Don't, as much as sometimes we want to, I'm not going to pretend that I don't watch things sometimes and I'm like, nope. I'm just going to take it to Allah. I'm going to go sit and I'll talk to Allah before I cross that boundary. And know that we speak the truth. So when we talk about moral law, always speak the truth of what you see. Don't try to maneuver it. I'm going to keep coming back to that point. The truth stands on its own. Know the facts. So Ghazali is a great resource for the advocacy, for the concept of advocacy. I found a whole dissertation about common law and Islamic law and that concept of advocacy in those realms, and it was focused on the work of Al-Ghazali. And I think that he made really good points. But speaking is an act of worship. The Quran instructs us to cultivate good speech manners, but also speaking the truth. Allah speaks the truth, and Allah knows what we say and what we hide. So when we speak, make sure what you say is true. And if you're hiding something where you're only speaking half the truth and you're hiding, Allah knows. They may not know, somebody else may not know, but Allah knows what you're doing. So always go into these conversations and these spaces knowing that Allah knows what you speak, but Allah also knows what their intentions are in this space. But it's not just good, it's not enough to just speak the truth. The truth must be spoken with good manners. Truthful and honorable speech is the ethical standard in Islam. Don't go into these spaces and expect that it's okay to speak whatever way you want. We have to look at the way that we carry ourselves, because we are, at the end of the day, we are representatives of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this deen. And I remember once that when I was in college, we were dealing with some things. There was a president of another religious organization that approached me and said, hey, let's do an interfaith event with the MSA. And I said, okay, we could talk about it. And he's like, yeah, we'll do some singing, some dancing. And I was just like, time out, time out. I appreciate you wanting to include us. We're not going to be able to participate in that kind of event. We can talk about something else. And he's like, well, you guys don't sing and dance? I was like, no, not quite, not quite. And then he proceeded to degrade our form of worship. I said, okay, well, this is a great conversation. This is how we pray, and this is what these are our boundaries, and this is what we will interact in and what we won't engage in. If you'd like to continue this conversation, we can do it at another time, but I need to leave. Goodbye. Did he ever approach us again? No. But what had to hold was what our standard was, regardless, and that we're not going to bend our... I didn't have to tell him, well, like, you know, this is stupid. Why would we come and do dances with you guys? Like, that's not what we, you know, that doesn't benefit Islam, nor does it benefit the conversation. I allowed the conversation to occur with a boundary of this is what we'll allow, this is what we will not allow, and move on from there. So, methodology of advocacy. I'm constantly working on this. It's a constant work in action. So you have to know your facts. Educate yourself on the matter and who you want to advocate to. Who's your audience? You need to identify the individuals, groups, or organizations that you wish to engage with or advocate to. What's your purpose? What's your intention? And then you have to let go and relinquish control to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'm currently working on my master's in jurisprudence. Last semester, which is the study of law, specifically health law. Last semester, we had to do an analysis on a policy, a law that's passed in your state, and contact your representative. I thought, okay, you just write a letter, I don't really like this, blah, 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 blah. No, it took all semester of researching what the law was, looking at papers about the law, looking at the analysis of who it affects, what parties does it, and formulating my analysis. I had to take each positive or negative and then justify each point and what it could mean. And personally, I looked at what in North Carolina is the abortion law. And I had to learn to break it down. And even though I support the idea of, I don't support abortion, but also if we're looking at the way the law was actually written and the analysis of it, it doesn't take care of the health of women. It actually doesn't protect healthcare workers, doesn't protect those in ambulances or what could be an emergency. And I had to write to that, and then I had to advocate as a Muslim. While I do not support the idea of just willy-nilly abortions, but I support the life of a woman more, and the life of the physicians, the doctors, the emergency care workers to have the ability to do what they need to do to protect the life of the mother or the woman that's carrying the fetus. So looking at what each thing is, you have to study it. You need to learn it. If it's Palestine, learn the history. Pick a point in the history. Know the facts. Go back and read primary documents. There are so many documents out there. I still have all the journal articles from college in like 3-ring binders in my house that I've been digging through to refresh my knowledge of the conversation, because it's been a long time. It's been since I was in college, graduated. But the point being is you have to keep up to date. You have to be able to discuss the law and understand that you may not be able to change every little thing. You have to be able to understand that sometimes things are going to be incremental. And this specific conversation, I can tell you from when I was a teenager to now, The fact that we have this many people outside protesting, the fact that we have had people get arrested, that this is drastically different than when I was a teenager and trying to play like, oh, I mean, you know, we're kind of from Lebanon, we're not quite from Palestine, like, you know, we're not, yada, yada. I'm not meandering. I can sit in a space, say I'm Palestinian, I come from refugees, this is my history, and I'm not gonna back down from it. So, so on that note, inshallah, I would like to open up the floor. Are there any questions, anything that anybody would like me to go back to before we move on to navigating difficult spaces? Do you have any? No questions? Okay. Okay. All right. Do you want to still take a break, or do you guys want like a 5-minute water break? Who's in the room? Okay. The next point is going to be talking about how to actually navigate difficult spaces, how to approach them. Anything? Anyone want a break? We can move on. I'm okay. Okay. All right, bismillah. So, navigating difficult spaces. So, name a difficult space. What are places that are considered difficult? We'll give a couple minutes for this. I was going to say, if there's any questions that come up, I'll put them here. Oh, my apologies. I did not switch that part. Thank you for letting me know. There we go. Does it take you to the new question? Try it again. Here, hold on. There we go. School, work, white America. That is a difficult space. It's a very difficult space. Yeah, I can see. Okay. Neighborhood. Here, let me. You're welcome. neighborhood. All right, I'll give about another 30 seconds. Work seems to be the biggest one so far. All right. Work is a very hard place. And I've seen it go either or. Sure. I'm going to share a story of, I've shared it before. I actually had a manager, this was about 6 years ago. I thought we were friends. I got hired in this position because the company I worked for laid me off, and the woman that I spoke to, we had worked together previously. She said, "Hey, yeah, please come work here." I interviewed. It's a running joke. I interviewed on my due date with my second daughter, the one that was just talking to me right now. I went to the doctor in the morning, and then I went to an interview right after. It's a great experience. Worked there for a couple of months. I started to see some inequities, just in general, racial inequities that I was not very comfortable with, and I would kind of keep an eye on them. And then I started to speak up. But the other issue was that one time another manager was talking, and him and I were on good terms, and he said, where are you from? My usual answer is, I'm from Raleigh, like born and raised here. He goes, no, where's your family from? I said, thank you, that's the better question. I said, I'm Palestinian. He goes, oh, but the woman that I thought was a friend proceeded to tell me, oh yeah, the terrorists. And I remember looking and just, yes, sorry. I just kind of looked at her and I was like, Anyways, why? And then he proceeded to tell me that he knew Palestinians in his past, and he was like, that's really cool. What part are you from? You know, etc. That was one experience. But then I had another experience that was, I think, in work sometimes I deal with difficult conversations with humor. I had a CEO who was, he was a Zionist, and I knew this, and I was, you know, you work in your space. I had a good manager. I was happy in my job. And I was pregnant with this was before I got laid off. I was pregnant with my oldest, and he was like, yeah, you should go travel when your kids are young. I did that, and I explored, like, my history in Tel Aviv, like me and my family's history. And I looked at him and said, oh my gosh, we're from the same place. And he just kind of stared at me. And we got really awkward. I said, I'm from Jaffa, which is like where Tel Aviv sits on top of now. And he just kind of stared a little bit more, and then he was like, I gotta go. It was good talking to you, Sarah. I gotta go take this call. And he left. Somebody was like, aren't you scared? I said, what? I didn't say anything. I said, we're from the same place. He's from Tel Aviv, I'm from Jaffa. I'm going to let it be known where I'm from, and it's okay. I got lucky with that interaction. The other job, I ended up leaving after another month because I was tired of seeing the racial inequities. Actually, I've left a couple of jobs because of that. Because witnessing it, speaking up on it, can lead to very uncomfortable conversations, but also I'm not going to negotiate my ethics and morals because of a job. Work is very hard. Some spaces you can speak up, but you're going to get a lot of backlash. And what I want to emphasize is, again, going back to the point of advocacy. It is a privilege if you are able to speak up in your workplace and be able to withstand and protect yourself, or have the ability to look for a lawyer or take on the costs of paying to have defense for people, you know, reacting a specific way or getting punished based on your advocacy. That is a privilege in and of itself. And it's a beautiful privilege, but understand that not everybody has that space or that ability to take that on. And that's why I firmly stand with advocacy looks different for different people. And we all have a role to play. It can be posting things on social media. I've seen a lot of stuff where it's like, I don't see somebody posting. They may not even know their password to log on and post. They may have decided to fast from social media or not engage. They may be doing things that you don't see. And so I want you to enter this space of understanding that it's not always going to look the way that you think it should look. Talk about community centers, who is right, conflicts, children. Children are hard. It's very hard to, hi Aisha. Having conversations. Having conversations with children about these difficult subjects. Having 3 of my own, sometimes it's hard to hide my emotions. And I don't like to hide my emotions, but I also don't want to overwhelm them either. We've discussed where we're from. They're half Pakistani and half Palestinian. And we discuss what that history is, because I think that they should be proud of their heritage and where their families came from. And that does entail the conversation of war. And that doesn't entail the conversation of refugee status. I think Encanto was one of the hardest movies to watch, not just because of all the generational stuff that was occurring in it, but that first scene of them running because of, if you haven't seen it, I'm so sorry, I should have given you a spoiler alert. There's a refugee status implied in it. And when I watched it with my children, I had a hard time. And then I was able to actually use that to articulate to them, that's what your great-grandfathers experienced. And my children have had the blessing of knowing their great-grandfathers, at least some of them, and their grandfathers, and being able to talk about and see how the trajectory has been over time. Not everybody has that luxury. And it can be very scary for children. So I advocate that you follow, there's some parenting experts that are Muslim that I think that you should follow, because they have given some really good tips of just discussing the conflict with your children and discussing your emotions. Sometimes I don't give details to my kids of what's going on. I discuss what I'm feeling based on something that I saw and how I'm processing it. It's good. It's not the greatest, but it's a work in progress. White America. This one's fun. It's a consistent problem. It is not something that is just, I mean, when we're talking about Palestine, I push that. So we know that a good example is, who I'm not a big fan of Bassem Youssef from the past, but the way he turned that interview on its head with Piers Morgan is how you have to engage. Because there are a lot of baiting questions if you are to engage, and you have to fight the enticement to go in and try to defend yourself and overcompensate. Because the leading question is, do you condemn Hamas? That's not the conversation. That's not the conversation. Is this a religious war? Absolutely not. This has absolutely nothing to do with religion. It has everything to do with colonialism and settler colonialism and the establishment of a state in a space, and specifically a European settler state in a space that is not for them. And it's repeated itself in Africa. It's repeated itself in the Middle East. It's repeated itself in South America. We're seeing a shift in the world that was coming a long time. And so what I push is that when you're in a space of advocacy in these spaces, do not allow it to turn into a religious conversation. It is purely colonialism in a post-colonial world. It never ended. Cold War did not end. This is just a reimagination of it. All my studies have shown that, all my academic work has shown that it's not over. So these are things that I push for you to, navigate and learn. The internet and social media. Social media is a great tool, and it is a very burdensome space to be a lot of times. I think it's really cool though, looking to see how things have changed in the past month, in that there are people that I never would have expected to pick up the Quran, to talk about what they're reading, what they're understanding, what they're exploring, understanding the history better, because I know I've had to navigate this history with friends that don't know anything other than what they were taught in school. And I've had an experience where I had to correct my own history, talking to friends who did not grow up in the United States. And they asked me, I have a friend that's from Kenya, and him and I spoke. He's a coworker, and he's like, where are you from? I said, I'm Palestinian, and then he looked at me, he goes, I know where Palestine is. And I was like, oh, my bad. Like, he's like, I didn't grow up here. And having that American filter sometimes blinds us to understanding that there are people that actually know the difference. But it also should give you some grace towards others that may have been their only filter. The education system has not done us well, those who went through public school, and engaged us in a way. So it is a conversation that social media is a great place. I recommend, though, do not engage with trolls. There are so many bots and there are so many trolls. Say your piece and keep it moving. It's in the Quran when in Abasa, Prophet ﷺ turned from the blind man that came to ask a question, and Allah tells him there was somebody that came to ask you, you were busy entertaining those that were not interested. Speak your piece, speak the truth, but do not continuously feel like you have to go back and forth with trolls as much as you want to, because we all do. The world is not easy. This is not an easy space to be in, to say the least. All right. So, navigating difficult spaces. Let's go into that. So, stand on the truth. Have you not considered how Allah sets forth a parable? A good word is as a good tree, its roots firm and its branches in the sky. It brings forth fruit in every season by leave of its Lord. Allah sets forth parables for mankind that they may remember. And the parable of the bad word is a bad tree, uprooted from the face of the earth. It has no stability. God makes firm those who believe with firm speech in this life, in this world, and in the hereafter. Keep that close to you. Surah Ibrahim is, of course, my son's name is Ibrahim, is a place that I constantly go back to for how to navigate spaces and how I carry myself. But this right here, this truth, is the one that carries me forward. Remember what I said, the truth can stand on its own 2 feet. The bad word, it's rotten from the inside. Look how many times they've had to lie and correct and adjust and delete and move. How often have you seen that happen with any of the videos that have been of the truth? And then our own president had the audacity to be like, don't believe the numbers. Like we can't confirm or deny that they might be right. And then tried to proceed to have a conference with Muslim leaders, only inviting one Palestinian American. Your words matter. Your vote matters. And I actually advocate for you to push forward with your representatives in your local your local people. So how do we do that, right? You start with attaching and orienting yourself to Allah. Nothing is attainable without Allah's permission and allowance. Keep yourself focused on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Keep reflecting on the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Keep reading the Quran. Your answers are there. Don't be fearful of humans. Understand the truth that it can stand on its own 2 feet. You don't need to sell it. So when we're talking about contacting your representatives, right? Things that I learned in my class, my master's class about advocacy and just analysis, policy analysis. Address your letter to the chief of staff. Don't try to send it to the representative, because the representative gets an influx, the main office gets influx of mail. Send it to the actual chief of staff. Look it up. It's easy information online. It's very accessible. Send it there and address it to them, because they're the person that the representative or the elected official talks to the most. That's 1. 2, keep your points very straightforward. You may put I think you should put your emotions in there, but put the facts forward, especially here in North Carolina. If we're going to talk about advocacy and speaking up on what's true, the Muslims are a voting bloc in North Carolina. North Carolina is a 50-50 state. Every little vote counts, and how they sway matters, because it's just off by a couple of percentage points. So you have to be able to state where you're going, what you're doing, what is the goal here? Here's my overarching goal. Here's how I think that this is going to affect you. And money-wise, you need to fix all these things. I've had one call with a congressman the last time we had to deal with this, during the pandemic in the West Bank. It was David Price. And I remember that I looked at him and I said, you know, Congressman, you are the head of the urban planning, whatever committee in Congress. Durham has potholes all over the place. Like, we don't have schools, we don't have apartments. I'm born and raised in North Carolina. I can't afford to live here, but you're sending money to another country to obliterate civilians and innocent souls for what? Like, where is your conscience? But you have to be able to those are the facts. Where's the money going? Trace it and speak to that. So if you're going to send something, send it and be purposeful in what you articulate. The other thing that I would advocate you to do, or encourage you to do, is if you're going to send something, if you're writing an email, I really like our automatic email system where, you know, you can do 5 phone calls or 5, emails, but they have filters on their emails. Change the wording a little bit. Change the subject line, if you can, before you send out those emails, because it won't get caught by the filter. It'll go straight to them. The algorithm is a great thing. Like, I mean, I set up filters all the time in my email, because, sometimes there's just an influx of stuff and you don't need to get all that junk mail. But don't let your voice be silenced, and call. Call repeatedly. I think that there was, at the conversation I heard last week, the Imam was saying there was somebody that they spoke to that was a chief of staff for a local representative in Maryland. And when they said, when he asked, what happens when these things go on, he said, we don't get a call from the Muslim community. Nobody ever calls. Every time we're dealing with this, it's silence. But that's in Maryland. I mean, it doesn't define here, but make sure that you take the step, or at least attempt to do something small. Everybody has a different role. Some of us are behind the scenes, some of us are presenters, some of us are out in the streets protesting. Some people, they can't protest. Some people may not be able to even go protest. Sometimes they're the people that have water bottles for those that are protesting. Sometimes they're the ones that are saying, hey, don't pin your hijab, wear a jersey hijab, wear a magnet, take an extra hijab, put it in your pocket or whatever, because that's a danger for you. They're the people that may be in the kitchen making sure that everybody has food when they come back to sustain those that went out to protest. There was Hassan ibn Thabit, was not a Sahaba radiallahu anhu that fought. He couldn't fight. He was a poet. He was a poet for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. but he didn't fight. He had a different role. And and there were some women during the time of the Prophet ﷺ that fought because they could. There were some that were nurses because that's what they could do. Everybody has a role. Do not diminish the role of others because it doesn't look like yours. And don't be afraid of humans because everything is by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So here's some resources for education. If you want to send them out to others, you're going to do the Institute for Middle East Understanding, IMEU, Mondaweiss, Amnesty International's Israel's Apartheid Against Palestinians. You can donate. These are organizations that are reliable and that are actually trying to get resources into Gaza. But don't stop learning. Don't stop educating yourself. Don't stop trying to do as much as you can. Do what you're good at, and then work to improve what you're, and take, the only way we can grow is if we do something a little bit harder than what we're used to. And it's gonna be uncomfortable. It is going to be awkward, especially when you start to really get into things. I know for myself, there are certain things that are really hard for me. I'm learning to read the Quran with tajweed. I'm with my tajweed teacher once a week, and she corrects me as much as I think I know Arabic, and she makes me recite over and over again. And the first few times, it's very uncomfortable because it doesn't feel natural to the way I've done my recitation. But after practice and doing it, it's become easy. So the best thing that you can do to get out of the spaces that you're uncomfortable with and navigating those difficult spaces is start to have those conversations. It may not be contacting HR and sending a company-wide email. It might just be talking to your coworker that's next to you and say, man, I'm having a really rough day. This is what I'm hearing. Like, this is what I'm dealing with. This is what I'm seeing. I don't really like it. There's all these children that are suffering, and I wanted to tell you about it. Sometimes it could be just you talking to your friend. Sometimes it can be contacting HR. Sometimes it can be sending a company-wide email. Everybody has a different place. Everybody has a different capacity, and every company's different. So, and every workplace is different. To navigate that space is to know where you're at and know what you're capable of having the conversation. But it starts with you. It starts with you understanding what you're feeling and being able to put words to those feelings and what you're witnessing. It's not just about yelling and screaming at people, because sometimes that message gets lost in the sauce. So, we're constantly told, we've seen it happen. We saw Bassem Youssef. If you haven't watched the interview, I will warn you, there is a language warning, but he does a good job of turning the conversation on its head. I laughed because there was a little bit of dark humor, and sometimes that's what we need. But this was another commentator that spoke on it. Let's see if it'll play with
They want everyone to condemn Hamas. If someone asks me to condemn Hamas, listen.
Sorry, we're going to lower it.
Condemn Nelson Mandela and the ANC until you did, until he was a hero. You condemned Mahatma Gandhi until you did. You condemned them.
Why is it skipping? Hold on. Yeah, let's see. Let's try this again.
They want everyone to condemn Hamas until you didn't. You condemned Nelson Mandela and the Arafat Nobel Peace Prize. Let's just wait and see, because you might change your...
Yeah, it's skipping. Okay, I'm going to open up on YouTube. So the question that he was asked was, do you condemn Hamas? And this was his response. Let me make sure the volume is lower because, hold on.
They want everyone to condemn Hamas. If someone asked me to condemn Hamas, I would say, what's the rush? Let's let history decide. You condemned Nat Turner until you didn't. You condemned Toussaint Louverture until you didn't. You condemned Nelson Mandela and the ANC until you didn't, until he was a hero. You condemned Mahatma Gandhi until you didn't. You condemned Yasser Arafat and the PLO until you gave Yasser Arafat a Nobel Peace Prize. Let's just wait and see, because you might change your mind on this one too.
So, you see how he turned that conversation on its head, right? That's an art. That is an art of advocacy and an art of speaking up. When somebody asks you to put something into perspective, they're baiting questions. My purpose for getting through this with you is, do not allow them to bait you. If you sense that, adjust it and think on your feet. And it's going to take time and experience and on and off again. But don't feel negative about yourself if you don't do it right the first time or the second time or the third time. And then go and watch videos and practice and engage with your friends and conversations, and do it in small doses. So the big spaces that are difficult, remember the Prophet ﷺ had them too. We're not unique in this experience. He ﷺ had his own people throw him out of their town. He had his neighbor literally put trash at his door every day. So while we have this difficulty, keep orienting yourself to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, keep trying, keep engaging, and have sometimes the smaller conversations that build up into larger conversations. It's not always the big presentation. It's not always the immediate big response. There are some people that are great at it. I admire so many of our lecturers that are out there doing the work. MashaAllah, I don't know that I could do that kind of work, but I also recognize that they're equipped to do this. They've practiced, they've done the work, they've tried. And how many times have you seen now, on the internet, someone's like, oh, so-and-so made a mistake. They did. We're all human, and that's part of it. So to navigate that space is to give yourself grace, as well as understanding that it's a work in progress for everyone, and start where you're comfortable. You don't have to be a hero in every sense of the word. So inshallah, this is where I'm going to conclude. If you have any questions, please. Yep. Is here? Okay.
So inshallah, if you have any questions for today's session and last week's session, you can ask now and we'll go through all the questions inshallah. We have some questions that came in on the online form. We'll also post that link inshallah for you guys and just ask questions. And anybody over here who has questions, let me see if I can get another mic. Actually, we'll give you the mic and then we'll answer questions accordingly. Questions?
Assalamu alaikum. I just wanted to make a quick comment. I agree with you, Sarah, about Bassem Youssef and that whole interview. I'm not a huge fan, but the way he flipped it upside down, I don't think Piers Morgan's ever going to be the same after that interview. And I think we need to really learn from, like you said, the people who know what they're doing and know how to engage. But also I'm thinking about my coworkers at school who came to me to ask questions. And I was pleasantly surprised that there were more people than not who were positive and who were affirming and who were like, we're praying. This is crazy. And I don't think we should ever underestimate the responses, because I think there are a lot more woke people than not. And I think people are beginning to understand the Zionist propaganda is like falling apart. It's falling apart on its face. and people are now beginning to use their heads and not just taking it. And alhamdulillah, like I asked my principal, I said, are we checking in on our Palestinian kids? Are we checking in with our Arab kids from the region? And I had a talk with the counselors at my school. I said, you guys better be doing a lot of checking in because I'm holding you accountable. And they were all like, this is horrible, and we have been, and kids have been trickling in and crying and just stressed out. Because we do this with children on a day-to-day basis. We had a parent from Israel who came and just laid into the team teachers saying, you better not be discussing this, what's going on in a way that my child will have to deal with anti-Semitism. So I paused and I said, I'm co-department chair of the social studies department at my school. So I paused. I said, okay, so why don't we have a chat with the mom, sit her down and talk to her about how we deal here with minority students. More than half of my school are minorities. I've got more kids from the subcontinent, Hindu, Pakistani, I've got more African American and Latino or Latinx kids than I do white kids. So let's talk about the issues that we're dealing with our minority children as a whole. And don't come with your white privilege and say, you know, you better not, you know, who are you talking to? So I was like, I'm so happy to meet with her. I'm so happy to have a conversation with the social studies teacher and the principal. Bring it, because we're done. This is gonna get shut down, and it's gonna get shut down now. And my principal was very supportive. So like I said, don't underestimate how people think and how they're navigating. We're stressed out as Muslims. We're stressed out as human beings who are thinking, but there are a lot of other people who are thinking the same thing. So, jazakallah khair.
The QR code that you're seeing is a QR code for questions. They're anonymous, so you can just submit your question, inshallah. If there's, so you guys can keep thinking of questions, and then in the meantime, we're going to go over the questions that came in. So here's one that Basir will answer from last time.
Well, I was going to just read the question out loud first. Maybe we can answer it all together, because it's not like, all right, so this question stood out to me: how to balance the threats of being blacklisted as university students from jobs while also wanting to speak up for the Palestinians. Yeah.
So the imam that I listened to last week, he's actually an imam that grew up partially in Gaza. He's from Gaza and he's American. He actually gave a really good point of this. This now comes on the duty of the elders to start providing support and legal support for the students that are in universities. Because there was a parent that asked, what do we do with our kids in high school that want to speak up? He goes, let them. Because the youth have the fire in them to speak up. And those that are in college have the ability, but we need to help provide the financial and legal support to push that, because change starts in the universities. I mean, you know, we saw stuff change while we were in college. So most change comes from the universities and the thoughts come there. So you have to, we as a community, provide the support needed to those that have the fire, one, and that have the ability to speak up in spaces that, yeah, they're gonna get whiplash. We saw it with our professor, but we as a community can provide that resource for them.
I just wanted to add on to this. Today's focus was intended to help guide like young people and families and whoever in terms of advocating and doing it in a way where I know parents are going to be really concerned about their kids. So providing them resources on how to do it effectively, I think, is the most important thing over here. It's not to avoid interaction. It's to do it in the way that's going to be effective, but also in a way that like we provide them resources and guidance and so on. So at least the hearts of the parents and families are going to be, you know, settled, inshallah. And also the energy and the fire, the passion that the young people have, we're going to be able to channel it in the proper way, inshallah. So we're not cutting it off. We don't want that, because we want change to happen. And if they want to drive this, inshallah, they have the energy, they have the motivation, let's support it. So that's sort of what we were focusing on today, just to add it on.
Yeah, and I'll just add on that, and you mentioned on one of your slides about just sticking to the facts. I think that if you were to engage in a conversation or speak up, you want to always bring up facts first, really, so that people know that you're coming from a place that is objective, right? And we're seeing the numbers now of the people that are dying, and it's, the last I saw yesterday night was like 8,000, I believe. And the number of children I think I saw was, I want to say 3,000 to 4,000. So, you know, the word genocide is appropriate now. And you guys, I mean, those are numbers, and this is what it is. This is genocide. These are the number of people that have died. I don't have to say much else, really. You know, and if someone were to come back at me with an argument against that, I mean, I don't know what they could say. Conversations get very challenging when emotions are involved. And that's when you can start to get clouded in your judgment, and you don't want to say something. And the point about, you know, speaking up, and just if you want to be verbally speaking up for what you believe in, go for it, right? But if you also want to be safe, just if you want it to be safe, I mean, if you want to cover your grounds, cover your bases, then be objective, so that, and if people were to be, you know, recording you, right, or if this is a text message or email conversation, for whatever reason, and there's a paper trail, you could just say that this is what I said, this is the evidence for it, right? I'm just saying what I'm reading online, right? What these, you know, what's actually happening. And I think that being mindful of that. It's also very empowering too. I think that when you start to gain knowledge and learn what's happening, you are empowering yourself. And with that empowerment comes a confidence, right? That you have every right to speak for what you believe in. And if there were consequences, I think that a person would be more at peace with it, speaking their truth.
This is to keep building on that idea of speaking the truth and knowing your facts. If you need, or if you want facts, I mean, I'm going to share my information, inshallah. You can contact me on Instagram or my email. There are things that I have, like I said, pulled out all my 3-ring binders from a long time ago. But there are so many resources at hand, and it's free. Like, it's not just all on, like, where you have to pay or take a class. It's free information to explore these facts. And it's not just about Palestine either. We know that Sudan has had over 9,000 people murdered in the fights going on in Sudan. We know that DRC, millions. I'm still educating myself about that. Remember what I said, go with what you know, but start educating yourself about stuff that you don't know. And now I've had to start to explore, what does that look like? We experienced a rise during the pandemic of this concept, you know, of George Floyd was a spark point, and it was a trigger, and it's difficult. But what was difficult for me watching it, not just watching a live murder on TV, but the fact that he was being held in a way that the IDF held my people down, that I watched growing up. Because guess what? Our police officers are trained by the IDF. So we don't just send government financial support. We have contracts with, you know, each state has contracts with Israel to train police officers to exchange that information by the IDF. So those uncomfortable conversations sometimes is speaking the truth. I was asked by some coworkers long ago, like, hey, come do Krav Maga with us. And I was like, no. Like, why not? It's cool. The IDF uses it to, like, street fight. And I was like, why would I want to learn how those forces go and abuse my people? And it was a way but then it made everybody feel very uncomfortable. And yes, it was just, it had to be that blunt. I'm not going to engage in learning the tools that are there to abuse my people. And so you got to just speak the truth. That's what they use. And sometimes people don't actually know what that means, right? Yeah.
One more thing. Sarah had mentioned about imperialism, and that this is not just like a religious war. If you look at history, for example, just American history, if you look at Vietnam, John Kerry, Senator John Kerry, when he was presenting in front of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, he mentions about the war crimes that were done by American soldiers. War crimes that I don't want to talk about here because I don't know who's, like the kids who might be listening and so on. If you go and look at what he said in there, it's like, I don't know how to describe it. It's like beyond inhuman. But like, this is what was happening. If you look at, for example, the history of the United Fruit Company, which is now Chiquita, right? That's the branding that happened afterwards. But how there was in Guatemala, there was a democratically elected leader, and then because of some disagreements and so on, the CIA supported the militia that went eventually to go and kick him out. So the fact is that when it comes to imperialism, if you talk about it from that angle, it's a little bit easier to navigate that conversation than it is if you talk about religious stuff, right? This is a religious war versus this is just imperialism. It's a history. In fact, you can even bring the point, for example, we're changing Columbus Day to Indigenous People Day, right? So these kind of conversations, or in this way, might also be effective, inshallah, in some cases. We're also looking at the questions that are coming in, so we'll answer those.
Assalamualaikum, Sarah. To your point as far as engaging with our elected officials, so I do that thing where I change my email, or change the subject of the email. I write a few sentences in between the paragraphs. I get a form letter back. It comes from a no-reply email, and I could write anything, and I'll get the same horrible form letter back saying, Israel, we love it, we think it's good, and of course playing it down, but they say some very horrible, horrible things in there. And it's very frustrating to get that same letter back every single time from both our Republican senators, our congresswoman, or my congresswoman, at least where I live, Deborah Ross, has also been very vocal in her support. I have not gotten any letters back from her. I've called their offices here in Raleigh. They just literally like, oh, I don't know, you need to call DC. So I called DC, talked to people day after day, and they just say, okay, thank you for your opinion, and that's it. I mean, I feel like I'm banging my head against a brick wall, and again, and then I get that form letter back saying, no matter what you say, we love Israel. No matter how many people go out there and protest, if our elected officials are preaching this line, then what do we do?
Bismillah. It is very disheartening, but this work requires patience, perseverance, and persistence. And we know this in the Quran. Allah tells us those that have, sabr is not just patience. It's like it's a patience that is persistent and having faith. And I will tell you, keep doing it. It is really annoying. It is really exhausting. And even with the meeting that I had 3 years ago with Congressman Price, it was me, it was Muslims for Social Justice, there are a few of us, there are Jewish Voice for Peace, it took a big crowd. I mean, there were 10 of us on the call, and it was like pulling teeth to get that meeting. And then he proposed, oh, we're still going for the two-state solution, and everybody just kind of lost it on him because it was like, that was 1991, maybe. But you can't propose that kind of conversation if we're looking at violations of international law on a regular basis and the land grabs. So it is very frustrating to keep getting the cookie cutter emails, the cookie cutter experiences. My coworkers and I, back in 2020, when everything started with the George Floyd, every company had a cookie cutter email. I didn't work at that company anymore, that I left because of inequities, among other things. When my coworker called me and he was like, hey, we got the email. I said, oh, was it the same one that everybody else got? That was just like, here, copy paste, put your company name in here. He goes, yeah. I said, so what happened? He said, well, Ben replied and said, no, you don't care about us. You don't value us. You don't, It opened up the conversation. However, did anything change? Maybe incrementally. Maybe there were small changes. But it's a persistent fight. It does not, keep pushing. I know it is hard, and it is going to be it's not going to end with just Palestine. It's going to be so many things where we have to show up in local elections and actually speak to our local representatives. The ones that are in DC, cool, but guess what feeds into them? Your local elections, your town, your city, your school boards, all of that feeds into DC. And if you don't change down here in the grassroots area, and we don't engage with them in a way where we show up to school board meetings, where we align ourselves as a voting bloc, and we're not all gonna agree. We're not always gonna be on the same page, but we have to help support those that are doing the work. Your voice will eventually be heard. The system is not built for people like us to be heard. So don't get down on yourself. Keep pushing. And that's my advice to everybody. Don't minimize your effort, because it is still a lot. It's still something, because at the end of the day, and we've talked about this a few weeks ago, it's your intention, and it's your intention is to be with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because at least then you can go in front of Allah, and that your brothers and sisters that are suffering from whatever it is that they're suffering, they're not going to look at you and say, you did nothing. You let us die, or you let it, you have that at least in the clearance. It may not be in this world. And I think Mehan brought up a good point with Leah. He couldn't have imagined what it looks like now. Maybe that was never his goal, but keep pushing.
I would just say, not politically, but social media-wise, I think that, there's movements in the past have built on momentum. I think about what happened in 2020, and, I remember protesting in downtown Raleigh, and I remember thinking, okay, this is pretty intense, it's a one-day thing, but then they kept happening, right? It was like 3 weeks of protests, and then even it continued afterward in various forms. And it made me realize that to make change, it does take time, and people start to catch on slowly. Even in the past 2 weeks, I feel like, and I think Sarah mentioned this too, I've noticed a shift. I think you've noticed a shift, more people becoming aware, and even when it feels like, okay, I guess, this was kind of, maybe not, we didn't have the impact that we wanted, people start to kind of speak up. And it just takes time, and I think people, I can't speak on, politically, but I just, like, from a social point of view, impacting the people that are in our lives, friends, family, friends of friends, the network that we have that we don't even realize that we can impact. It just takes time and momentum. And I think that it would be unwise to go easy or go off the gas now, to keep pushing. Because change, and you felt it, I'm feeling it too, the slow shift in awareness. Now what that does policy-wise, I don't know, but it's definitely a step forward,
Just to add on also, while this particular means of emailing may not seem as effective immediately, there are also other means that we have available. So, just to diversify a little bit. Also, like they were saying, the civil rights movement, the entire process took a long time. And change takes a long time. In fact, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions when He talks about tests, وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ وَنَقْصٍ مِنَ الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَنفُسِ وَالثَّمَرَاتِ وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ. That at the end of the day, it's as if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, in this case, وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ means like, give glad tidings to as-sabirun, the ones that are perseverant, right? The people who have grit. Grit is like you just keep on going relentlessly, you don't give up, right? You keep on trying and trying and trying, and that's it, because you're going to be rewarded for your trying, right? So وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ, in other words, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to come to a state of having sabr. It's as if these tests are intended to kind of teach us this understanding of what sabr really means, right? And you can imagine it like this, like let's say you're going on Highway 40, I-40, right? And you're going and going and you lost your GPS, but you're supposed to be on this road. You don't know how far you're away. You don't know, which exit you're going to take, but you know that it's going to come soon. You know you're on the right road, you just have to keep going. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows when that opening is going to come, but that's not on us, that's not for us. So we just have to keep trying. It might not happen, like I said, in our generation, but it will be recorded for us in our record. And inshallah, as time goes on, the people that are going to be working with us, the people, like when it comes to our kids, for example, our family members and so on, that's the legacy that we also leave behind for them, so that this work never stops. We become role models for the people that we interact with, and that's very important as well. If you're a parent and you're not getting involved, for example, and you're not encouraging your kids to get involved, this momentum is going to slow down. But if we are the ones that are facilitating and we're encouraging our families and friends and community members and stuff to continue this effort, then this is going to build up eventually. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that when it comes to grassroots, right, the grassroots efforts, at the end of the day, you can always try to reach out to your leaders. I'm not saying give up on that. Continue that, right? But at the same time, focus a lot of your energy on things that you can do sustainably, things that are not going to burn you out. This is not something that we're focusing on as like a race that's going to end, it's going to end like in a day or two. This is like a marathon. You keep on trying. And in fact, even after this specific scenario, this specific situation, right, there's going to be many other things that are going to happen. So just having the understanding that this is a lifelong journey that we have, that's going to be very important. And if we teach this to our kids, when they grow up in their times, whatever conflict that arises, in whatever part of the world, whatever context that they find themselves in, they're going to have that understanding, and they're going to be able to continue without getting overwhelmed, inshallah.
We talk about the shift, right? The shift in the narrative, the shift in the protests, the numbers, the people showing up. It's there, and there are points that there's beauty and there's a little bit of humor. I saw a video the other day of, this was from a woman from New York, and she said, white people, I thank you for showing up. Like, I'm glad that you're finally starting to see this and you're showing up to our protests and whatnot. She goes, but I'm gonna need you to be careful with what you say. I was like, what is she about to say? I was like, what? And she goes, all of y'all are repeating, you took shahada, because they're repeating the chant, La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. She's like, I expect to see you all at Jummah. Like, I'm gonna start keeping an eye out for you guys. But the fact that that's happening, I have friends that I did a presentation a couple weeks ago, and I read Surah Al-Fatiha, and I don't ever live stream, but I streamed it on Instagram, and a friend of mine who is not Muslim watched it. And later on we were catching up, and my friend goes, I didn't understand what you recited. And he's like, you started reciting the Quran. And he goes, as soon as you finished, I was like, bars. I was like, what? He's like, I've never heard the Quran being recited. And so there's humor in it, because it's like, it's a point of levity, but understand that even in those little interactions, those quirks, having those conversations of somebody saying, what are your thoughts on this? And my favorite question is somebody's like, do you have family there? And I'm like, no, but it doesn't change the fact that I'm still Muslim and I'm still Palestinian, and this still affects, because it's like, it doesn't change my heart of what I see suffering, whether it's in Palestine, whether it's in the Congo, whether it's in Nigeria, whether it's in Pakistan, whether I see my Muslim brothers and sisters suffering, I'm going to be affected by it. And that's what makes us beautiful as a community. But on the same note, we've seen a shift. Like, Allahu Akbar. I can't say anything but that. Whether the government systems get a hold of it, that's going to take time because this country is based on common law. And they actually watch what is I've had to learn that the system of law and the system of policies is dependent on the time that it is in and what the population articulates. So if you notice that the talking points in the past few elections have been abortion, what's the other one? Racial inequities and healthcare. Those are the three that have been the most prominent. And you'll notice that they pay attention to who's the loudest. Right now, they've redistricted to make the loudest people who's giving the money. It doesn't change the fact that we've seen a shift. It may be 50 years in the making, it may be 10 years in the making, but there's a shift, and trust the path. It's gonna be hard. Okay, I'm gonna look up the names for the parental experts. Yep, okay, so there's one question that, can you please share the names of the Muslim parental experts you look up on how to talk to children about the war? I will double check her name. And then what age were your kids when you first started talking to them about the war in Palestine? My oldest is 8. Okay, hold on, I'll take care of that in a minute. She's trying to play a game. No. That part. My kids are great at just asking the blatant questions. She's asking my, date of birth or whatever for a game. My middle daughter is 6.5 and my son is 5. I started, I'd say about 3 years ago with my eldest, because that was when they started to do the attacks on Al-Quds during Ramadan. And she caught me watching and I started to cry. And she's like, "Why are you crying, Mama?" I said, "Because they're attacking us. They're attacking the Muslims while they're praying without any what's the reason? There's no reason. There's nothing happening. There's never a reason for an attack on anybody that's praying, but why did they pick Ramadan? Why did they pick Al-Aqsa? Why did they, and it's frustrating." And so I started to have those conversations, and I had to start guiding them a little bit in spaces that this is the reality of where you come from. And I have to give it to even my parents. My father was very clear where I came from as a child. I mean, we talked about it. I didn't know the details or the intricacies, but I knew I came from this part of he used to take like my little, if there was an atlas in a book and he'd scratch out Israel and he'd put Palestine. And then I would get confused when I had books in school. I'm like, that's not what we have. But I've learned entertaining their questions helps a lot. What do you want to know? Because that helps direct the conversation. The woman that I follow, let me see what, I think her name is Dr. I'm going to look it up, and I'm going to give y'all anything you want to add.
There's another question. Where was it? Right here. Does healing from such events by changing your environment, let me actually rephrase the question. Does healing from such events by changing your environment, would it be considered to be running from the situation? So I think there's a difference between a healthy coping skill and an unconscious defense mechanism. So not to get too heady, but things become unhealthy when you're not aware of them, right? If I'm avoiding something or repressing something without knowing what I'm doing, all right, that might be considered unhealthy, although that's also subjective. I think when you're consciously deciding to maybe change your environment, leave a conversation, leave the space that you're in because you're uncomfortable, I personally find that totally appropriate and okay, right, within reason. I think this question highlights a feeling that a lot of people are struggling with, and that is a feeling of guilt, that I'm not doing enough or I can't do much. And I think that there's a difference between feeling or being powerless and being hopeless. I think that, you could be in a prison cell and be totally powerless, but that doesn't mean that you don't get to have hope, right? And to still have your faith. And there might be situations where it is difficult, if not impossible, to speak up and to say your truth. But that doesn't mean that you still can't believe it in your heart. And you still can't say your truth at a later point in time. Maybe when you are more comfortable or you are more safe. If you have a job that you really need to provide for your family and speaking up on a topic is going to jeopardize that, I think it's okay to be mindful of that and to be safe, to protect yourself and your family. You don't have to help in that way, in that specific moment. I think it's a hadith that says, if you can't change something physically, then change it in your heart. Hamza Yusuf actually said that in his talk that's on YouTube about 2 weeks ago. And Sarah mentioned this too, not judging each other for their advocacy. We all are going to be involved in different ways. If someone's not sharing or posting on social media, who are we to judge? So I think being guilty is something that we're all struggling with because we all want to fix this situation now. So I think you're not alone in that feeling. But as far as that specific question, would I consider it running away from the problem? I personally wouldn't. And the fact that you're even asking it shows that you care, right? And you're being mindful of where your intentions are at. You can't fix this in one moment or one day. So, and as mine also said, it's a marathon, not a sprint. Anything else you want to add?
And just to kind of just add on to that really quick. Last week's conversation was about managing our emotions, understanding where they're coming from, how to manage them, how to process them, and so on. Because like they were saying earlier, when you're emotional and you're having an emotional conversation, you might not actually get anywhere. So understanding that we need to manage our emotions, and then when we engage, we could do it more objectively, and we're going to be able to sustain that continuous effort, in this marathon, inshallah.
So the parenting guide that I use is Dr. Hannah Ghanoum, and her handle on Instagram is drhanaa.peacewithinhome. And she's had posts talking about how to address what's happening with your children and answering questions. And just your relationship with your children. I think that she offers a lot of great advice in terms of attachments and navigating the world generally as well. But yeah, going back on, it's a marathon. And marathons are hard. They are exhausting, and there's points that you want to quit. But you have to remember that the goal isn't to see it right now. The goal is to see the long-term effect, if you see that. Leave it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Yeah, there's a question here. How can we feel okay knowing our tax dollars are funding this? Well, I guess you're not supposed to feel okay. And I think the thing about tax dollars, America is not a monolith, right? Just because the country, the government is spending money in a certain way doesn't mean that people are supporting it. And as what's been already said in this talk, and also in other talks too I've been listening to, it's important to be mindful. Mufti Menk had a great, I think it was a khutbah, it's on YouTube, it was posted yesterday. He just reminding people that there are a lot of non-Muslims that are supporting Palestine and that are also speaking up against what they're seeing. There's actually a Jewish organization that's been doing a lot of advocacy work. They shut down, what's the train station in New York City? Grand Central Station. And the images are powerful, right? And we need more voices like that to be recognized, not only for outside the Muslim community, but also I think for the Muslim community itself, to recognize that this is not a Muslim versus Jewish thing. right? There are a lot of non-Muslims who are speaking up against what's happening. There are a lot of Jewish people who are speaking up against what's happening. A lot of Jewish people have nothing to do with Israel, right? And I think it's important to always be mindful of that, right? So that you're aware of where your heart's at. You know, I would hate for this to affect how we view the world or how we view people spiritually, right? Anything you want to add?
Also, keep in mind, we're Muslims, so whether something was happening to non-Muslims or Muslims, if there's any kind of bad stuff happening to anybody, we're at the forefronts, right? In Surah Al-Waqi'ah, Allah Azza wa Jalla mentions about 3 groups of people on the Day of Judgment. One of them are the people of the right hand, one of them is the people on the left hand, and then He separates the 3rd group from the 1st group. He says, As-sabiqun, as-sabiqun. These are the ones who were the forerunners, these are the vanguard. These are the ones that are at the forefront of everything good. So they're not the ones that are, you know, these are people who are doing good things, all that stuff, but at the same time they're classified in their own category as sabiqun, as sabiqun. The forerunners are going to be the forerunners on the Day of Judgment, inshallah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls them أولئك المقربون. These are the close ones to Allah Azza wa Jalla. So keep that in mind. This is a social justice cause, this is a humanitarian cause, all of that. And remember that we're going to do this, we do this for anybody, anything that we see wrong happening, we go and try to change that, we make a difference. There are a lot of questions. We're obviously not going to be able to go through all of them, but we are, this one? Yeah, go ahead. So do you want me to read it or do you want to read it?
I'll read it, and I don't know if you guys have any thoughts. How to combat Islamophobia, especially as converts. How to deal with fear, sadness, guilt, etc. Yeah.
So I'd actually advocate for our brothers and sisters that have come into Islam to look towards others that have come into Islam as well before you, that have experienced this world. Because I can speak to what my experience has been, but I grew up in Islam and I have a different experience in that, specifically the concept of, you know, conversion or reversion. And I think that there's a lot of really great imams and individuals that can speak to it in a better way of navigating that, especially within your families, because I know it's a struggle to be somebody that came into Islam and then your whole family and those around you that might be against you, that you may be fighting. I can provide you support emotionally as somebody who grew up in the deen, but I don't know what your experience is. I can empathize with you, but I'd push that you find in your community or even online spaces that you have safety. I think the biggest thing that I'd push for anybody is find a space that you're safe in as a Muslim, whether it's your friends, whether it's your masjid, find spaces that you can be yourself and ask the hard questions and have those that will guide you to the right place, or a place that, you know, will actually offer you support. Because I can come and say something, but I don't have that experience that maybe you have, and I may not be able to guide you in the best way possible. That's kind of Islamophobia. I'm gonna be very honest. I don't really give it attention. I get comments. If I do, I don't engage. Usually they're really in passing. You know, they're passerbyers. They're people that are not. They're too cowardly to say something and actually want to have a conversation. If they're willing to have the conversation, I'll sit and talk. I'll be like, hey, listen, you clearly have a question, you clearly have some concerns, let's sit and have a conversation about it over a cookie and some coffee, some tea, whatever it may be, because everybody loves food. And engage in that way and be in a productive manner, but I'm not going to sit and argue with your perspective. I think one of my favorite interactions was one time I was out to dinner with a bunch of Muslims, like women that I grew up with, and we were all talking and we were laughing and whatever, and somebody came up. I don't know why she picked me, but she picked me and she goes, you know, we're leaving because you guys were really loud. Okay, I didn't make you leave. Like, you paid for your food, that's cool, but I don't understand what that has to do with me. We were a group of 20 people in a restaurant. Now, what did I in return say? We need to tip the waitress because she did not get anything wrong on our orders. Everything was perfect. It was hot. I said, treat the waitress well, because I don't think they even treated the waitress well. Note that Islamophobia, I think, comes from a place of fear and a place of misunderstanding, and a lot of time it encourages talk to people, engage, and don't walk around with a look on your face of don't talk to me because I might bite your head off. I constantly get people in the stores that'll be like, hey, can I ask you a question? Because you look friendly. I was just looking at the cookies. Like, I'm smiling because there's cookies here. But opening up that conversation and engaging with it sometimes is not as bad as it seems. It's usually just coming from a place of fear.
I think that it's a hadith. Maybe I'm wrong. Islam came as something strange and will always be something strange, so blessed are the strangers. And I think for me, I had a kind of a shift in my thinking. I used to think, you know, how do we combat Islamophobia? How do we get people to, and then I was like, you know, why should I care what people think? You know, ultimately, I'm not doing this for them. I'm doing this for my Creator. This is a path that I am blessed to be in because it gets me closer to Allah. And if people have an issue with it, then that's their problem. I don't need to, this is where I'm at right now. There are other people that might be struggling with, you know, how Muslims or Islam is perceived. And I would advise them to be focused on you and on your path. And you can't make people happy even if you tried, at least everyone. Someone will always have an issue with you. And these days, you know, one thing about being in America is that you are allowed to be you, right? You are allowed to, people are identifying however they want. And so there's no need for us as Muslims to be ashamed of anything or to be worried about not being accepted by the majority that's out there.
So we're running out of time. What we're going to do, inshallah. So what we're going to do, inshallah, the rest of the questions, there's a lot of questions and a lot of comments as well. What we're going to do is we're going to start releasing answers, and like with the Imam's office and so on, inshallah, in collaboration with others. As these answers are coming out, just keep one thing in mind. As you're going through this, keep your composure. That's the most important thing here. Don't get frustrated. Don't get into emotional conversations and so on. Just stay composed. Allah Azza wa Jalla is going to help anybody who tries to do anything for His sake, right? And if you stand with the truth, like Sarah was saying, it'll stand on its own feet. So stay composed and don't feel helpless, don't feel hopeless. Things are going to work out eventually, inshallah, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in control. Even if it doesn't happen in your lifetime, it's going to happen at the end of the day. وَالْعَاقِبَةُ لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. And the end abode is for the muttaqun. So with that, two things. There was a request for programs and conversations related to this, just educational stuff, just to mentor the kids and young people and so when it comes to advocating and so on. We're working on that. The other thing is that resources are available. There are many resources out there. There's a WhatsApp group. It's like a grassroots movement thing. And then also there's a booklet, a handbook that Maristan has released. Maristan.org. If you go there, MARISTAN.org. If you go there, it's on their front page. It's an entire booklet on how to navigate as parents, what kind of resources do you need when it comes to giving information to other people. It has videos, it has a bunch of stuff in there. It also introduces the idea of how to approach us as Muslims with our deen as our guide through this entire thing, inshallah. If you're parents, you'll have resources on how to navigate your own mental health, also how do you engage with your kids, and so there's a bunch of stuff in that booklet. So it's a really useful resource, and I would recommend going through it. And there's a lot of other resources you'll find, inshallah. We'll also start posting them soon, inshallah. With that, I'm going to invite Imam Muhammad so he can do the closing dua, inshallah, and then we'll go ahead and end.
Assalamu alaikum. Ya. So inshallah ta'ala, as I said, part of my khutbah, support is much appreciated inshallah ta'ala, and the support could be financially, support could be by your words, by spreading your dua, spreading your tweets, spreading your protest. You can go out for protesting and stuff like that. So all this is needed so you can share the words and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept from all of us. We've been consistently making dua and making prayer, and as I said, all of this matter, all of this. Do not belittle dua and do not belittle your sharing and the support, whether it's word or financial and all this kind of thing. It's help inshallah. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept from all of us. Allahumma ameen. اللهم اهدنا فيمن هديت وعافنا فيمن عافيت وتولنا فيمن توليت وقنا واصرف عنا بفضلك شر ما قضيت إنك لا تقضي بالحق ولا يقضى عليك إنه لا يذل من واليت ولا يعز من عاديت تباركت ربنا وتعاليت فلك الحمد والشكر على ما أنعمت به علينا من نعمة وأوليت اللهم إنا نسألك بأسمائك العلى وصفاتك العلى أن تجمع شتات المسلمين اللهم اجمع شتات المسلمين ووحد كلمتهم ووحد صفهم اللهم اجمع قلوبهم على أتقى واحد فيهم يا رب العالمين اللهم اجمع قلوبهم على أتقى قلب فيهم يا رب العالمين اللهم إنا نسألك نصرة وعزة للإسلام والمسلمين اللهم إنا نسألك نصرة وعزة للإسلام والمسلمين اللهم أرهم يا رب العالمين حلاوة الإسلام وحلاوة الإيمان وحلاوة هذا الدين اللهم أنت السلام ومنك السلام فحينا يا ربنا بالسلام واجمعنا في سلام واجمع بيننا وبين الأمم في سلام يا رب العالمين اللهم من اعتدى علينا فلا ناصر لنا إلا إياك يا رب العالمين اللهم من اجتمع علينا وظلمنا فلا ناصر إلا إياك يا رب العالمين اللهم انصر المستضعفين في مشارق الأرض ومغاربها يا رب العالمين اللهم انصر المستضعفين في مشارق الأرض ومغاربها يا رب العالمين اللهم مدهم بمدد من عندك اللهم مدهم بمدد من عندك وانصر المظلومين يا رب العالمين اللهم انصر المظلومين يا رب العالمين اللهم انصر المظلومين يا رب العالمين اللهم إنهم رملوا نساءنا ويتموا أولادنا فعليك بهم يا رب العالمين اللهم من مكر بالإسلام والمسلمين فاجعل كيده في نحره يا رب العالمين ومن أراد بالإسلام والمسلمين خيرا فوفقه لما تحب وترضى برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bring Nasr, victory for the Muslims. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to unify Muslim upon one heart. Allahumma ameen. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give victory for those who are suffering from their oppressions. Allahumma ameen. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to elevate this suffering. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to elevate this harm. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bestow it upon all of us. The tranquility that strengthen the hearts and bring the peace. Allahumma ameen. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept our murder among the shuhada. Allahumma ameen. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give patience for those who are suffering from this disease and from this illness. Allahumma ameen ya rabbil alameen. Ya Allah, ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by His name to peace, to bring peace for the humanity. Allahumma ameen. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us among those who are strong with their faith and their identity, and to make us among those who are facing this calamity with patience. Allahumma ameen. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to support us and to use us to serve this deen. Allahumma ameen. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bestow it all upon all of us, His forgiveness and His mercy and His tranquility. Allahumma ameen. Subhanaka Allahumma bihamdika astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk wa ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant wa akhiru da'wana an alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen wa sallallahu wa sallim wa barik ala Sayyidina Muhammad. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Our session. The recording is online. You can go back to it anytime. You can also share with other people. We're going to leave the question form open, so you can still go back and ask questions and so on, inshallah. So then we can have all the compilations, or all the questions compiled, and then we'll go ahead and continue to answer them, inshallah, over time. So again, the recording is online. You can use the same QR codes for the questions. Keep sending them in, and we'll keep trying to address them as soon as we can, inshallah. Jazakumullahu khairan.